While I was poking around Twitch the other day, I noticed that the daily streaming rate for Oblivion Remastered had plummeted in the 2 months since the game's release, despite it wildly outselling the original version. To some extent, this is to be expected. Highly anticipated games always have a crazy high peak in streaming viewers immediately after release, and then at some point in time there's a drop-off. The more I looked into the data in journalism though, the more I started to wonder, did Bethesda flop with Oblivion Remastered? Join me in my mini open source investigation, my mini data dive. To answer this question, I started by looking at streaming data for Oblivion Remastered on Twitch Tracker, which is a website that compiles streaming data from Twitch. It revealed that, lo and behold, Oblivion did suffer the typical drop-off in numbers of both channels streaming the game and viewers watching those channels. This wasn't surprising, but I wanted to know if it was normal relative to other games of a similar type. Therein lies a problem though. Oblivion Remastered isn't a normal game. It's a remaster, which means it's hard to compare to other games. I thought the most similar game would be Dark Souls Remastered, as it's another remaster of a high fantasy RPG that originally came out a while ago. The Dark Souls data was even more confusing though. First of all, its data on Twitch Tracker doesn't go all the way back to its release in 2018. Other data sites like Twitch Tracker had the same issue though, so I don't really know what kind of drop-off Dark Souls Remastered had after its release. What I could see was that Dark Souls was a bit of a sleeper, with it slowly gaining in popularity beginning in about 2023 or so. What was interesting was Twitch Tracker's ranking data for both Oblivion Remastered and Dark Souls Remastered. This ranking system is dynamic, which means that it changes every day. I took a sample of 4 days of rankings of both games in the last 2 weeks of June, and then calculated the average of those samples. To anyone who's about to yell at me in the comments, this isn't a perfectly structured data sample. I know that, trust me. Twitch Tracker doesn't publicly aggregate its ranking data though, which means that anytime I want to collect this data, I have to collect it by hand on the day that I want the data from. For the purposes of making a silly little YouTube video, these samples are good enough. Here is a table of my data. The average rank for Oblivion was 170, and for Dark Souls Remastered, it was 182. If you look at the last 3 days of data, you can see that there's actually really close numerical overlap there between the two games. Taking these rankings as merely a snapshot of the game's performance, it's not clear that Oblivion has been performing all that well, considering it came out just 2 months ago. A supposedly successful remaster that came out just 2 months ago should rank clearly and consistently higher than a remaster that came out 7 years ago, right? When looking at the same data for similar games, though admittedly not remasters, a similar story played out. 3 days worth of data showed that Baldur's Gate 3, a game that's been out for 2 years, averaged at 111. The Witcher 3, one that's been out since 2015, I'm so old, averaged at 198, just 36 spots below Oblivion Remastered's average at 162. I feel the need to say this again. Oblivion came out 2 months ago, Baldur's Gate came out 2 years ago, and The Witcher came out a whole 10 years ago. You would think that if Oblivion was such a smash hit, the average rankings for these games would be in a different order, with Oblivion as the top game. You would also expect there to be a much bigger difference between Oblivion and The Witcher, considering the latter came out 10 years ago. Okay, so maybe Oblivion isn't doing that well, but just on Twitch specifically. Twitch is a niche platform after all, and not all or even most gamers regularly interact with it. Using that knowledge, I decided to take a look at the history of reviews of Oblivion Remastered on both Steam and Xbox.com, and boy did that look not great. For clarity, I only looked at review data for the base game of Oblivion Remastered, not the deluxe edition. Immediately, it was apparent that for whatever reason, Oblivion wasn't doing so well on Steam. This is despite the fact that overall, the game has a very positive rating there. Casually perusing through some of these reviews, I saw that a lot of them complained about the bugginess of the game. Continuing to use Dark Souls Remastered as a rough comparison, it does not suffer a worsening in its more recent reviews. It has a very positive rating in both review categories on Steam. The Xbox review story is similar, if not even more dramatic. At first glance, a 4.0 star rating from 9.6 thousand reviews doesn't seem so bad. Once I looked into the data, however, it seems like the aggregate rating of 4.0 stars was way more positive than a lot of the more recent reviews. I then took a sample of the 50 most recent reviews available as of June 28th on Xbox.com and ran a few basic calculations. My sample of 50 reviews had an average rating of 2.98 stars, way less than the 4.0 aggregate rating. Like the reviews on Steam, many of these reviews complained about the bugginess of the game. 33 of these 50 reviews, or 66%, mentioned some kind of bugginess. Of the 4 and 5 star reviews even, that rate was 36.8%. That seems really high for people who generally like the game. Of the reviews with 3 or fewer stars, that rate jumped to an alarming 83.9%. Across Xbox.com and Steam, a lot of the reviews complaining about bugs specifically mentioned that a recent update, version 1.1 of the game, made the game either essentially or fully unplayable. Bethesda has said that it's going to release another update of the game soon, but it hasn't given us a specific date. Maybe the second update will fix what the first update appears to have broken, maybe it'll make things worse, I can't say for sure. Alongside technical issues, there is another long-standing problem with Oblivion Remastered that both critics and regular gamers have complained about. The game has no mod support. It's not clear that Bethesda will ever provide mod support, and there is thinking out there that if they do at some point, the mod system will be paid. Yet another thing for big gaming to monetize. Yay. The issue with bugginess and no mod support is that not only do gamers give the game a bad review, it leads to decreased longevity of the game. Skyrim's popularity is so enduring in large part because of the mods that have improved the game's complexity, appearance, and functionality over time. Okay, maybe Oblivion is buggy, has apparently harmful updates, has no mod support, and just happens to be crashing on Twitch. That doesn't mean that overall the game is a flop. To be fair to Bethesda, Oblivion had crazy good sales straight out of the gate. As of May, it was already the third best-selling game of the year in the United States and the single best-selling game in the US in April. Incredibly, in just 1 week, the 2025 version outsold the 2006 version's first 15 months of sales. The game's sales seem to have slipped some in May according to sources, falling to 5th place on Steam and 6th place on PlayStation. I'm having a hard time finding sales data other than that. This begs the question, wouldn't a game that's having notably good sales in May and early June have more stories in the news about it? Maybe this silence is attributable to the delay that is necessary to collect and analyze data. Maybe this mounting pile of not great evidence isn't what it appears to be. Microsoft's fiscal year ends on June 30th, with their next earnings report set to release on July 29th. We might get a better look at the sales data then, but I'm not holding my breath. Microsoft's annual report for 2024 didn't mention Bethesda at all and contained exactly one mention of the Elder Scrolls franchise. This type of data just doesn't rank as important enough to the corporate behemoth that is Microsoft or its annual report. One final consideration here are the forces outside of Microsoft and Bethesda that might contribute to the plausibly sliding performance of Oblivion. In the last 2 months, we've seen the release of some truly incredible games such as Clear Obscure Expedition 33 and Elden Ring Night Rain. It would also be hard to ignore the release of the Switch 2 and Mario Kart World alongside it. I'm sure that this has had an impact on the overall gameplay hours and sales of Oblivion Remastered. Yet, like a lot of other rebuttals that I've tried to come up with, this just feels like an excuse. A truly good game would be resilient in the face of releases of other games, not vulnerable to them. Admittedly, my methods are imperfect, and I might be reading a little bit too much into this data. Who knows, maybe a new earnings report or a swath of gaming journalism will prove all of my claims wrong. That said, I've found a variety of evidence pointing to sagging gameplay, reception, and to some extent, sales. It might be extreme and a bit early to call this a post-peak flop, but I can't rule it out either. To frame this another way, if I were a data analyst or game developer at Bethesda, I would not be thrilled with this information. The unfortunate reality is that the sugar high that is the this part of Oblivion's release might be enough for the business heads at Bethesda and its corporate owner. As I've said elsewhere on this channel, the people increasingly in charge of calling the shots at gaming studios, especially those owned by big companies such as Microsoft, make decisions based on what's good for investors, not gamers. So what if Oblivion Remastered's longevity is limited and its lifetime sales aren't as good as they could have been? The game still generated these kinds of headlines, and at some point, a stock trader over on Wall Street took interest in that. Let me know if you agree or disagree with my assessment, and if you have your own sources to contribute to this. Thanks for watching this video essay, and don't forget to like and subscribe.